Welcome. Dude, you can't talk during my... I was already in the fucking flow.
Joseph, can we keep the outtakes?
Yeah, we do. We keep the outtakes.
Okay, ready?
When I'm in my creative process, you don't fucking interrupt me. You know that. Let's do it live. We'll do it live.
Okay, we'll do it live.
Welcome back to I and That Guy. I'm Wes Chatham. This is my good buddy. Sometimes hugger, sometimes snuggler, sometimes lover, Timothy Franck. How you doing, Timothy?
I'm all right.
I can't do the gross stuff I normally do because we have literary folks on the podcast right now.
We have a literary persona. A literary persona. A personage of literary merit.
A personage of literary merit. Who's our guest today,
you guys can snuggle in front of me.
It's Hugh Howey, a fellow novelist and screenwriter and
world traveler, adventurer.
Guy that I spend 3 days every year with.
Best 3 days of my year.
So yeah,
on a romantic tryst in Italy.
Little romantic tryst. It's me and Hugh and Adam Savage just making out for 3 days.
Oh man, that's gonna start a whole slash fanfic.
Yeah,
I'm gonna write it
for him somewhere.
Three homely old dudes making out is a hot slash stop.
Hold on. Hugh, I don't know if Hugh's old, but he's not homely. He's got a Kevin Costner thing going on.
He does a little bit, but he is old. He's super old.
Yeah. But
Thanks, Ty.
Hugh, you're from the South, right?
Yeah, grew up in very rural North Carolina.
You were born and raised there, or did you leave earlier?
Yeah, grew up on a different kind of farm. My dad did small grain like wheat, corn, and soybean, but we had cows on a huge part of his land that it was someone else's cows. He just leased the land.
Do you find that because you grew up like that you are attracted to something like New York City because it's like the opposite of what you grew up in, or do you still want to have that experience at some point?
I love both. I do love walking. I like going out my door and just walking wherever. I went and had lunch today, had breakfast with different friends in both places I just walked to. It's more fun for me than getting in a car and backing out of the driveway. But I've also lived on a boat for most of my adult life. So maybe it's just the newness. When you live in the South Pacific, it's all you can think about is going to a Thai restaurant or something. You're having fresh milk. You get pretty, your desires get pretty simple.
That's so sexy. As soon as you said that you lived on a boat for I picture Kevin Costner in Waterworld,
that was me.
You kind of
exactly me.
Yeah.
Wes lived on a boat for how long did you live on a boat? 4 years?
4 years. It was on a ship for 4 years.
But I did the Navy?
Yeah, I was in the Navy. I worked crash and rescue. I was on the flight deck. Not as fun as probably what you had.
That is so sexy. I'm glad my wife's not here. She would leave me for you.
I picture your experience Mutiny on the Bounty when Marlon Brando's pulling into port and all the the ladies with the shirts off and jumping off and everything, and you're there looking like Kevin Costner and everything like that. Where I didn't have that experience. It was a bunch of nice dudes, but it was all dudes, and we would be out at sea. At 6 months at a time sometimes. So,
get hand jobs from Marines.
No, never. They give the worst hand jobs. You never get hand jobs from a Marine. Yeah. You got to find Air Force. They got this. They
got nice soft hands.
They got the softest hands. It's really delicate, and they're gentle with you.
I've heard that. You're the second person to tell me that. So,
Hugh, I'm getting a Hemingway vibe from you because you're sexy. You grew up in as a country boy, but then you're a sexy world traveler on the seas. And then when did you start writing? When did that start happening?
After I started drinking heavily.
100% Hemingway.
Yeah.
I was 12.
Around the time you lost your virginity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And killed this first man.
Yeah, I tried to start writing actually when I was 12 and just couldn't stick with it. I could never finish anything I started. In my 30s, I thought I was never going to write a book, which is number one on my bucket list. But I finally found one story that I couldn't stop, and when I was 32 or 33, and wrote it to completion. And that's when I was just hooked and started writing as many novels as I could.
And what were you into growing up in terms of the not books you read or the movies you watched or things like?
Man, I was a voracious reader. I would read like going down the street. I shouldn't admit some of this stuff, but like I would have an open book on the steering wheel of my car as I was doing road trips. Just glance at the highway every now and then. Like I was a dangerous reader.
That was before audiobooks. That's much easier to drive.
Before Teslas, before anything like that. Yeah, I would get like my book taken away from me in class all the time. Like I was punished for reading all the time.
Oh yeah, I had many books taken away from me in class. Yeah.
I would cut class to go hang out in the library and read. I was trying to like prepare for my profession, and they were like, "No, we want you to memorize dates and stuff you'll never do anything with."
Were you a history major?
No, I was. We're talking about like middle school and high school.
Oh, okay.
I was So you see people like trying to force kids to read these days. They were trying to force me to stop reading. My mom was always like, "Put the book away at the dinner table. Be social." And so I started working in bookstores. I was like reviewing books for a career at one point. Like anything I could do to be around books. And finally like figured out a way to write them and was gonna just do it as a hobby. Like I never thought I'd make a living at it. And I had one of my stories, the one that went viral that kind of made me a full-time writer, is the one that Apple just released as a TV show.
So one of the things that like really connected Ty and I, and we became friends, is because we realized that story you just told, we were those kids too. We were obsessed with reading, obsessed with stories, obsessed with movies. Did you have a particular genre or authors that were kind of your favorite? Yeah, I know you probably loved everything, but is there anything that really got your attention?
I think it was the Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms books that really kept me occupied for a while because there were so many of them. Yeah, that was like shelves of the bookstore, so I could just work down them. And then I got
that was you too, right, Ty?
No, I never. I played D&D, but I never read the books. The thing that's interesting about the D&D books, though, is that while many of them were truly terrible, there were a few great writers who got their start in D&D books. And you read those now and you're like, oh yeah, that person was already good. Like they were doing D&D books, they were already good. So every now and then you would find a gem.
And then Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Ender's Game, I read those like back to back, and I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. But I was also like into comics. Every bit of spare change I got, I took to the most of my comics came from the drugstore. We didn't have like a proper comic book shop. We had that one spinner.
The spinning rack. Yeah.
Yeah. ROM and G.I. Joe and Transformers. Like I didn't even have a good selection of comics to grow up on. But when I got a little bit older, I found out where a comic book store was and would beg my parents to take me there. And
you grew up in the country. Was there is it hard to get your hands on some good material out there? Or did you have some cool bookstores in town?
No, the only bookstore I had was like a Walden Books inside of a mall. The mall, we called it a small because it was so tiny. Like,
see what he did there, Ty?
Yeah, I see what he did there.
Yeah.
It felt like this was a project. Like you could actually read every book in the shop. It wasn't like you walk into Barnes & Noble and the big independent bookstores now and it's overwhelming. And back then it was very underwhelming. But it was probably good for me because it focused, like they only had probably the books I needed to be reading. Almost anything you grab off the shelf was a big seller or won an award or it was a classic or something.
Yeah, it's funny because you get influenced because I lived with my grandmother for a lot of years. So I would read a lot of her books because like that was there, whatever. And I remember there was one video store that opened in downtown Weiner. We were so excited and we went there and it was just brown boxes with a piece of like a paper that was taped to the front. Like it was like thing. And then they had a pen on what the movie was. There was no cool like boxes to see like, what like kind of like posters of what the movies is. It got me interested
in like snuff films or something.
There was a few of those. My grandmother
it's just all street fights and stuff.
My grandmother loved snuff films, but she was a really good snuff film director. That's a little known fact. We'll talk about that other. But so we would go in there and that's when I got into like kind of odd random movies because we didn't, the big hit movies like Back to the Future would come months after it was out. Like it would trickle some way and find its way to Weiner, and there'd be 2 cases of Back to the Future, and it was always checked out. All these motherfuckers would always beat me to it.
It was like Welcome to the Future.
Yeah. Yeah, so like Welcome to the Future, but yeah, so that was one of the big challenges like growing up in the country is like getting your hands on the good stuff. you know.
The video store was such a part of our childhood. I think everybody's forgotten kind of like what it was not like Blockbuster. I mean, like the little video store that was in your town.
There was
Traces of Death was like this big thing that went around.
Oh,
everyone
yes.
had to go check out. And I don't think like anyone actually died in that. It was like
it was all bullshit.
Yeah, it was all crazy. But when you were kids, like this is, I mean, somehow there was no internet, but everyone my age was having the same childhood. We're having telling the same jokes, watching the same films, having the same experience. And I don't know if anyone's ever explained how that happens. Like how, I mean, I meet people who grew up in California in a small town, and we have all the same cultural like touchstones. And I was in a rural part of North Carolina, and like I never even had a phone line open in my house. You know, like how were we communicating and having the same lived experience?
It's TV and radio, man.
Yeah,
TV and radio. We were watching the same shows. We were
right. There's 4 channels. That's how we're.
Yeah, there was 4 channels, and radio. You know, everybody listened to the radio because that's the place you could hear music, right? I mean, there was no other way to do it. The thing that's fascinating to me about video stores is that we saw the entire life cycle of an entire industry in a couple decades. When I was a kid, the very first video stores showed up, and they were like you went to Sears and you rented a VCR because nobody could afford to buy one, and they had a little shelf with some tapes you could get when you were renting your VCR, and you could rent some tapes, and then there was all the neighborhood video stores that started to pop up, the little corner video store, the one that there was like a gas station, but like half of the gas station was also a video store. Yeah. Then there was the Blockbusters and Hollywood Videos, the huge mega stores, right? And then they were just gone. And it was Netflix. Like the entire life cycle of that entire industry happened in 20 years of my life.
And don't forget that Netflix was part of that story.
Oh, Netflix at the end, yeah. Yeah. Netflix killed them. But and I remember going to my friend's house, and he opens up his mailbox and he grabs a couple of DVDs or Blu-ray. It was DVDs then. I'm like, what is that? And he's like, oh, it's Netflix. I'm like, what is that? He's like, yeah, you go online and they'll mail you DVDs. I'd never even heard of that. And then within a couple of years, Netflix had killed Blockbuster, and they were all just gone.
Well, I think so. Blockbuster was never as interesting as those independent little video stores where they would have pictures of Bloodsport, like Van Damme, like life-size pictures of like that, and just like random shit. And they always had the best posters because they wouldn't revamp them. So you would have like Critters 2 in the thing when you drive up, and they would never get rid of that, like, cause they would never get new things. So it's like, it's 1997, you got Critters 2 in the thing.
If you went to the owner's house, he'd have all the good posters there.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
have all the good stuff there.
All that.
What kind of movies and stuff were you into growing up?
I mean, I wore out our copy of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I watched that over and over again. I would get a movie that I loved, and I would just watch it on repeat. And when I watch kids do that now, I'm like, I totally get it. Like they just want to spend more time with their favorite people in their favorite world. Star Wars blew my mind. Couldn't get enough of that. But stupid fantasy stuff, everything Arnold Schwarzenegger. I would watch anything that he was in.
Okay.
That was
Conan the Barbarian, greatest movie ever made.
Seriously, look at the cast. I can't believe they're just like, who would make the perfect one of the and then they got everybody.
Yeah, and it's like a dancer and a surfer. It's like a bodybuilder, a dancer, and a surfer made the greatest fantasy RPG team of all time.
Yeah, I agree. I grew up on the classics,
How many Arnold podcasts have we done? I know we did Predator. We'll do like a whole show on Predator, and I know we're going to do Conan. I don't think we've done Conan yet.
Yeah, we need to do Conan.
Oh, it's one of the best.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right.
We got to do True Lies, yeah.
Well, I've got a True Lies connection because Jamie Lee Curtis married my wife and I.
The three of you are married? That's awesome.
Yeah, we would have been up for that too. We were the 6th couple that she's married, and so far, she's got 100% success rate. So we got to stay together now.
How did all that connect and happen?
We were at this storytellers conference, and when Jamie heard that we were engaged, she started pulling her wedding ring off, and she said, "Let's do this right now. I'm ordained. Like, I'll marry you right now."
Holy shit!
And I was like, Jamie, slow down. Like, we just got engaged like a month ago, and we were planning our wedding for actually this year, and this is in November of last year. Word started kind of circulating around the conference, and it was a bunch of friends. We've known each other for a decade or so, and at dinner one night, the people we're having dinner with just kept berating us like, what are you waiting on? Do it now. Let's do it tomorrow. And so we just asked, like, could we put this together? And they're like, okay, we'll squeeze it in between morning sessions tomorrow and lunch. Like, so we had 12 hours to figure out our vows. And then Jamie Meredith and Christopher Guest is the,
get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, he signed our wedding certificate. So we like to tell people our marriage goes to 11.
So listen, you're not going to top that with a planned marriage. You did the right thing. You took Jamie Lee Curtis on it, because there's not going to be a better story that you're going to do. Also, you saved a lot of money.
Yeah, we had a free wedding. No, and we were like, okay, we'll do this that way, because we hated being engaged. Like, we wanted to be married from the day, I proposed to Shay. And so we're like starting to organize a bunch of stuff. We're going to have 2 different weddings, one for our family and friends and one for, our really crazy friends. And once we did it and we were married, we were just like, that was perfect. We're not going to beat that. So we'll have some like 5-year anniversary, something that we can get other people to. But
did you meet Shay while you were sailing the 7 seas, or did you meet her when you settled down?
Is this being recorded? Because
the show started, by the way. Sorry.
I shouldn't say this. We met on lily pads in a lake in Italy in the shadow of a castle during a full moon, and she was dressed as a butterfly and I was dressed as a wolf. And there were animatronic fish moving around through the lily pads, and there's about 100 of us out on these big man-made lily pads. Exactly.
How do I get invited to this?
Exactly. I'll get you into the next one.
Right.
It was a crazy gathering of friends, and I let people know I had some room in my car to get out to the place, and someone in the chain said, hey, can my girlfriend and I join you? And I was like, yeah. And man, we hit it off immediately, and just like complete bromance. And on the drive out, I was like, man, we gotta hang out after this event. Like, I've got a trip going up to see polar bears out of Svalbard, like, come join me. And he was like, well, I've got a wedding, I can't, but my best friend would love to join you. She's like a huge adventurer. She's a pilot, big sailor. She's always wanted to see polar bears. I'll introduce you. And so within 5 minutes of introducing us, Shay was like, my wife was like, yeah, I'd love to go. And so we got on this boat. We hung out in the event, but nothing romantic. But we were definitely interested in each other, and we got on this boat as strangers, cut off from the entire world. Like, no cellular, no internet, nothing. 2 weeks going around the most remote and northernmost city on the planet. By the time we got off the boat, we were like, we're spending the rest of our lives together.
Oh, wow.
It was like, just absolutely fell in love. And there's only like 12 passengers on the boat, and a few of them were good friends of mine, and they just had a front row seat to watching us fall in love.
Oh, wow. Ty, you know what I'm learning from this opening of our podcast so far? Is that I need to be Hugh's friend, because he goes to events.
He's a
Jamie Lee Curtis is
he's a terrible friend.
He's sailing around the world.
Terrible friend.
He's dressed up as a werewolf. He's going to parties where they dress up as fantasy creatures on lily pads with animatronic fishes swimming in between him, and there's like a massive orgy, and it's just, we didn't, okay, sorry.
You made that part up.
I might have inserted that, but.
He's like, I don't care about being your friend anymore. I'm not interested.
Yeah. You had me at orgy. You had me at orgy. But this whole time you were working, like noodling away, working, kind of like starting to work on your craft. And then one idea seized you, and that's when you completed your first novel.
And honestly, all I wanted to do was finish it. Like, I just wanted to tell people I had written a book. I didn't care about making anybody happy with the story. I was just entertaining myself. And I was so thrilled afterwards. I remember going through the next time I went through a drive-through, I just wanted to tell the person handing me my food, like, I wrote a book. I was like, I didn't know how.
Good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh my God. It was so cathartic to get that first novel written.
How old were you when you did this?
I was 32.
32. And what was that idea?
It was pretty much because I had done all my sailing when I was younger. Like, I dropped out of college and sailed around the islands on a little boat. And it was kind of a retelling of that from a young girl's perspective, which is what I felt like at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a space opera. This girl flunks out of the Navy, and she wanted to be a spaceship pilot, flunks out of the Navy, and then inherits her father's spaceship on the other side of the galaxy. So she goes with her, her school crush to pick it up, and they end up getting in all kinds of hijinks.
Have I read this book? What is this book? Did you ever sell this one, or?
Yeah, no, like I have more than half my books are still just self-published that I don't even promote. You know, it's like one will get chosen as a publisher to do something, and I'll tell people about it. But I wrote 4 books in that series, and it was like I had a small fandom of it, and it was actually paying a couple of bills. I was writing the next book in that series when Wool took off, and so I went and concentrated on that, and I still have like 70% of the next book in that series written that I've got to get to at some point.
That's your next show.
The only question I have is how bad do you have to be to flunk out of the Navy? Like how do you flunk at Navy?
It's so unfair, but it really makes you care for her.
I'm kidding. I'm just making fun of Wes right now.
He's just throwing a jab at me. Yeah. Hugh doesn't know when we're insulting each other.
No, he doesn't.
I've never seen Ty insult anybody. I'm really shocked by this.
Oh my God, that's his modus operandi.
I'm totally kidding.
Oh shit. Sorry.
That's all he does.
So man, I'm like you set up that book. I'm like into that book now. What's the name? How do I read that?
It's the Molly Fide series. My gosh, Wes, if you want to read some good books, I'll recommend some. They won't have my name on them, but I'll recommend some books.
And you self-published this, right?
I was just sending a Word document to anybody, and I was active on a forum at the time. I was like, I wrote a book, and everybody's like, dude, we're discussing something else. Like, why are you telling us this?
Right.
But a couple of people messaged me and were like, oh my God, send it to me. I'd love to read it. And so I just was sending it to strangers, and all my family, and no one would read it. But a couple of people from this forum read it. And one of them was this amazing editor, and like an academic editor. She was like, Hugh, this is like better than the last 10 books I paid for. You need to get this published.
Yeah.
And I was like, really? I knew I liked it, but I didn't think anybody else would like it.
Right.
And then my cousin Lisa read it, and she was like, where's the sequel? I need another one of these. And so I was like, oh my God, okay, so I need to start writing the next one for my cousin Lisa. And this editor was also named Lisa. So I was writing definitely for an audience of Lisas.
If you can get every Lisa on the planet to read your book, that's okay.
The 3 Lisas. If you get the 3 Lisas, that should be your next book, The 3 Lisas.
I'm telling all my friends, like, have you thought about naming your kid Lisa? And like, it's a boy. What are you talking about?
No, it's going to be Jamie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's got to be Jamie now.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I was going to put it up on my blog for free, just chapter by chapter. But a couple of people convinced me, no, you should send this out. So I learned to write a query letter. I started tweeting like as my character. I didn't know what to do, how to get this done. A couple of publishers just reached out to me after seeing some stuff on my blog and me tweeting some things, and I was just sending it to everybody at the time. And one of these publishers made an offer. The other one was getting ready to make an offer. And we're talking like very small publishers, tiny advance. But I'm like, wait, you're going to pay me? I was prepared to pay myself. Or have to pay other people to publish it. So I signed a deal, got to work with an editor, which was incredible, just learning how to write really from them.
Wow.
And by the time we published the book, I realized, man, everything they're using to publish the book are tools that are available to me. Like they were using Lightning Source, this print-on-demand service. They were listing things on Amazon. They were using, they weren't even going to do an ebook. And I was like researching stuff. I was like, we should put one on this, like put a version on this Kindle thing that was just invented that year. Mm-hmm. And so I got to where I was teaching them to do stuff. I'd be like, look, send me the file. I'll do the cover in Photoshop. I stole a version of InDesign, and I was like, I'll lay the book out. The more I got involved in publishing that book, I was like, man, it would be so much quicker and better if they just let me do everything. So instead of, when I got the contract for the sequel, I wrote them an email and said, like, actually, do you mind if I buy the rights back to the first book? I'm just going to go on my own. And I had a great relationship with them, and they were a little heartbroken, but my editor sent me an email and said, this is the biggest mistake you'll ever make. Mm. And that was kind of the stigma that I was up against for the next 4 or 5 years as I was doing everything on my own. Everybody was like, you'll never have a career making these decisions, But so I didn't do it because I probably could have, like, if I had taken my time and worked on my craft and spent more time querying, I probably could have, started off with a small publisher or a medium-sized publisher. But I wasn't interested in that. I just wanted to get the books available, have them look like books, have different editions, audiobook, ebook, print, and just do it on my own,
And this is new to me, and I think this is fascinating. This whole process, really interesting. This world is this. So at that point forward, did you self publish all of your books going forward?
Yeah, it was so easy to do the publishing part that I just I would write a book and then I would do 10 revisions or so on my own, and I would have my mom read it and a couple of other friends and incorporate any major changes that they saw, and then I would make it available within 24 hours and start writing the next book.
Wow.
And I just love the speed with which I could say, hey, I'm done writing that book, and then people were reading it within weeks, not waiting a year.
And that's how you did the Wool series, right?
Yeah, the Wool series was even weirder because it was it started off as a novelette, like it was 50 pages, so a little longer than a short story, but nothing you could call really a book.
Right.
It was 99 cents for the ebook and like $4.99 for the little paperback that looked like a pamphlet.
Mm-hmm.
That went, just went shot off, where I was making like more selling that ebook for 99 cents than I was making at my day job, like by a huge margin. And I was writing that other book in the Molly Fide series, and I was like, whoa, I need to throw a log on this fire. And so I was like, okay, people like this length, they like this story. I wrote another one that was a little bit longer, and then by the time I wrote the fifth part, I had a 500-page novel basically, and they were separate, and that really became almost like an inadvertent marketing thing, because those 5 versions of Wool were like all on the top of the Amazon bestseller list. And so if you're scrolling through the top 100, you would see like Wool 5 different times. You're like, what the heck is this? And as they just kind of like marched up the list until they were like top 5 books on sci-fi, and then someone was like, why do I have to click 5 times to read this stupid novel? Could you please combine them into a single file for me? And I was like, sure.
It's like a modern take on Dickens. It's like doing that how he would do that weekly thing and then come and it would create that story. I remember when I first heard the name Wool, we were doing if there's books I recommend it, if I come across a book on the internet or a friend tells me, a lot of times I'll go on Reddit and hear what people are saying about that book or whatever. And there was a certain book that I was looking into, and people on Reddit were talking about your book. And I just remember the name, and I remember being, oh, that's interesting. And then we were doing season 6 of The Expanse, and I remember I came home, but your book was already on Amazon. I think there was a few of them out of that time, and I was doing season 6 of The Expanse. And I remember coming home from work, and you guys, the show was in the casting process, and they sent me like the breakdown and everything. And I was like, oh, whoa, that's that thing that I was read about on and so I downloaded the book to my Kindle on my iPad, and I always like to get an idea of the project. I'll just start reading and like read like halfway through, whatever. And I started reading that fucking thing, man. And like I stayed up all night, like because like I wanted to know what happened next and what was going on, and and I remember going to work the next day like super exhausted. And I remember talking to Steven about it. I was like, dude, I ran this thing because he also saw the same breakdown that came his way. And
is that why the show got canceled? Because season 6 kind of went downhill.
Yeah, so you fucked it up for all of us. Your book fucked it up for all of us.
Yes, that would actually make me really happy if I did that to die.
What was that process like, getting that feedback before the story was finished? Did you know what the end was going to be? Did the feedback craft your end? Like, did you respond to it in some ways?
I think the way that I was able to respond to it is I could see what people were expecting, and I could subvert their expectations. Like when people were wrong, but they had a crazy theory, I could drop a little thing that made it seem like it was going to go the way they were thinking. But it wasn't a huge part of the process, but it did. It kept me engaged, kept me fired up. People would be like, "Oh my God, like this is Juliet, I love her. You better not kill her." And I would be like, "Oh, now I kind of want to."
You know what you had a massive writer's room. Like a writer's room will say, okay, what are all the ideas that you think are going to happen next? And everybody writes down, I think this is going to happen. I think it's going to happen. Okay, now we got to figure out what to do opposite of that, to subvert that.
It was also a lot like, the original storytellers were all live, and they, told it was an oral tradition. And so you could tell from your audience how you were doing it. People were nodding off or like sneaking off to go pee behind the tree, or you had that feedback. It felt so natural. Like it really jazzed me up to be kind of like we are now with weekly releases of a TV show, like I love hearing what people are saying in between. I think the whole binging model, I hope that, I like that you can binge stuff after it's out. So you can kind of choose which way you want to do it.
Yeah.
But the weekly release is so much fun because you have this conversation.
Yeah.
It's much better for the shows too. This is a thing that we had to deal with when we switched off of Sci-Fi and onto Amazon. There was this expectation that if you were an Amazon show, you got dropped all at once. And when we didn't, there was all this well, I don't want to wait for weeks or whatever. But all the evidence that you get, all the data that they have shows that shows that drop all at once die. Like the curve is everybody watches it for about 2 days and then it dies and nobody ever watches it again. And for a show to maintain any momentum at all, that's a killer. Like by the time the next season of the show comes out, you kind of forgot that you had ever watched it. Whereas,
because you only spent one weekend with it.
Yeah, you spent a weekend with it.
2 months with it.
And you never thought about what you'd seen. Because as soon as one episode is over, you just fired up the next one. So that previous episode, you never sat and thought about, oh, I wonder about this thing, or you never talked to your friends about it. There was no like community engagement around it. And Netflix did it at first. They were the first ones to do it. I think even they're regretting that.
Yeah, they're very stubborn about it. Like I would love to see them mix it up. It's fine to drop some things, but I think some of the really premier stuff deserves a weekly release.
Yeah.
Does Amazon still do that, or have they changed with some of their shows?
Amazon tries to do weekly releases. It's Netflix that has really doubled down on that we drop everything at once kind of model.
But at the time you guys were with Amazon, they were just dropping the whole season.
No, they weren't, but they had done it with a couple of shows. And so people were like, oh, you're on a streamer now. That means you'll get dropped all at once.
Yeah, and I've had the same thing. I've had so many people, like, they're angry at me.
Right.
Like, and I see that as a good sign. Like, I feed off that anger because that means that they're enjoying it and they want more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think streaming for me is, if I can't stream in the moment, I'm mad. I'm pissed off. I'm a binger. I always binge. But then when I'm forced to watch something week to week, like with Game of Thrones or The Last of Us, then it's like at the end of it, I'm like, man, I really enjoyed that process so much better than, just going through and binging it. But in the moment, I'm ready to binge it. I want to watch the next thing right away.
Well, I freely admit, when Silo came out, I was doing something else. So I did watch the first 3 episodes all in a row because the first 3 were out. So, but that wasn't because they were dropping them all at once. It was just I was doing something else.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting because, in 6 or so weeks, the whole show will be out, and then there'll be a different audience for it. It'll be the kind of people who hear that the finale is really great, and they'll watch it all in a weekend, and that'll be a different phase of the life cycle of the show.
Yeah.
What is that process like for you, where you created this story and you're in your office and you're sitting down and all this is coming, you're imagining this in your mind, this world exists in your mind, you put it on a page, and then now seeing it come into reality. What has that process been like for you?
I mean, you've spent a lot of time with Ty, and you became a big part of his world and one of his characters, so you've got a deep insight into this.
His favorite character. I'm his favorite actor.
His favorite character.
And his favorite character, yeah.
Exactly.
My favorite character played by the wrong actor.
It's surreal. I've had so many different emotions. I think the most interesting one that I had was I didn't realize how guilty I was going to feel when I showed up at the studio and saw how many people were having to get up every morning and their daily commute was to go sit in an office and work on blueprints and build sets based on something I wrote. And I was like, man, I really put a bunch of people out. Like
those are high paying jobs,
I know.
Those people make good money.
Hugh, let me tell you something.
It took me a while to realize they were happy to be there.
Yeah, you need to turn that guilt upside down. Those people are doing okay.
I learned to deal with it, but it was like, I don't like to make a fuss, for anybody. Like I don't like to put anyone out.
Mm-hmm.
And just the level of production blew my mind. Like walking into the set for the first time, and it's not just that it's something that you thought up; it's a better version of it.
Yeah,
because the people building it are so talented, and they're bringing their craft that they've honed on all these other shows. And so they're making a much better version of it than I would ever make.
That's the best attitude. The best attitude to have. I've tried to explain that to people, is it what you imagined when you wrote it? And I'll say no. And they'll say, well, are you disappointed? I'm like, no, I'm not a set designer. So what I imagined is way worse than what this professional set designer came up with. And as long as you have that attitude where like these people are amazing at the thing that they do, and it's okay that what they did isn't exactly what you pictured, because it's probably better.
That's been my answer to that question. Like, is it, and everyone is really nervous about that when you're visiting set. You know, Gavin, the production designer, would like take me to another, and he's like, does this look like you imagine? I'm like, Gavin, it looks better. It looks so much better. And people would show me like the fabrics they were using, and I was like, I didn't know fabrics existed. Like you have an entire office devoted to fabrics, and in my, sci-fi brain, like it was just metal surfaces, because I'm not as creative as you are.
Everybody had a silver jumpsuit.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm glad there were professionals involved to like save me from what I would have created.
He was nice enough to introduce me to Graham, the showrunner on Silo. And so I had a couple of very brief email exchanges, but the thing that I told him I was most impressed by was the production design and the clearly bigger than my VFX budget. I'm very jealous of their VFX budget, man. Because pretty much every shot in that show is a giant set extension.
Yeah, it really is crazy when they push over the rails and you see, because they built, I mean, the set they built's massive. They built 3 levels of the silo, and the entire exterior of that set's completely dressed, like just unbelievable detail. And then they just blue screened the ceiling and the floor of this massive warehouse and extended the set, in both directions. Pretty incredible.
Oh, they actually dressed all around. I had assumed a lot of that stuff was set extension.
They dressed it all the way around, but in order to make it look like different levels, they'll sometimes drape the entire thing in blue screen.
Right.
But yeah, it's all completely dressed.
One thing I'm curious about is, what is your writing process now?
Now I'm playing around with a lot of screenplays, so I'm getting to write with other people for the first time. Mm-hmm. So I'm fascinated by it. I think I picked Ty and Daniel's brains about this a long time ago when we first met, just because it seemed so cool to write with someone else. And now I'm doing that with screenplays. I've got a writing partner, and we're developing a TV show for AMC. We were until we went on strike.
Yeah. Did
a feature together, and like I just love bouncing ideas around with a co-creator. It's so much fun. But my early mornings are my most productive times for writing on my novels, which right now I'm working on the 3rd and last book of the Sand series.
Do you enjoy writing for the screen as much as you do writing novels? And is it a big difference in process?
It's a big difference. What frustrates me about writing for the screen is like writing something you don't think anyone will ever see.
Yeah.
You're kind of writing for the void. I do think I wish people published their scripts more often. Like, if something doesn't get made, throw the script on a separate like category of the Kindle, because I love reading scripts. I can see them just like a TV show.
I think everybody has that dim hope that somebody will find that script sometime in the future and will want to make it.
But more likely I could find it if it's like self-published.
Yeah, but if it's published, then I think there's this idea that if it has been published, it's less likely that somebody's going to buy it and turn it into a movie or TV show. I think that's the fear that people have.
The chance goes from like almost 0 to 0.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I think that is the fear.
I think also a lot of people don't think that there's a demand for it, but I think they're wrong. I think people would read things in a script format.
Well, Tarantino said, I heard him recently in an interview, and he said that all scripts that he writes it for the reader. So, a lot of people look at screenplays philosophy as like, it's just a blueprint. You don't need anything he goes, I disagree with that. I want it to be as entertaining. So if you just read the script, and he says, if I write a script and I don't make it into a film, then I want to publish that script. And so when I'm done with my last film, I will publish the scripts that I didn't make. And
I love that.
Yeah, I do too. And I would read all of them. I think
same.
his novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was phenomenal. It was he's just a great writer. The cinema speculation book that he wrote, like even that, like cinema criticism was like, he's just really wonderful. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we're adapting one of our screenplays, which probably won't get made into a novel, and boy, there's nothing better for an outline than a screenplay.
That's true.
Like, it's just, you just paint by numbers at that point. You've done all the hard work to get the plot. You've got all the dialogue right there. You just kind of take each scene and turning it into a chapter. And it's like, I would say it's the easiest way to write a novel, except writing the screenplay was so painful.
Yeah.
So it's not.
Do you kind of start to have an idea that hangs around for a while and you start to think about it and then you start maybe doing a little bit of outlining? Are you an outliner?
Not really. I keep real chaotic notes when I'm thinking about a story. Like the document would make no sense to anyone else.
Right.
But every like little idea that I have, I just kind of throw into a Word document or a notepad document on my smartphone. And then when I go to write it, I almost never even refer back to that document. I'm just like setting it down, kind of cements it. But I've by the time I write a story, I've usually like daydreamed the whole story enough that writing to me feels like I've seen this movie 12 times and I need to describe it to someone else who's never seen it.
Right.
Like I kind of, and then it changes a little bit as I'm writing. Like I'll find little diversions and details that I didn't think of.
Do you have all the mythology of the silo and everything thought out and written out? You know, Freedom Day and all the details and everything, and kind of have an idea of what the ending is before you start writing, or do you kind of explore as you write, like Stephen King style?
I explore as I write. I know the ending. I kind of want to know what the climax of the story is before I get started. So I have a destination in mind. I don't have all of the mythology. What's interesting is like when you're writing, you're just asking yourself a whole bunch of questions, and when you get into a good flow state, the questions come as fast as the answers come as fast as the questions. So it feels like you don't even have the question. You just like the answers are just pouring out. A lot of my books were built that way, where as soon as I have a question about the world, like the answer's already there.
Do you enjoy writing solo or with a partner more? Do you find that having a partner to jump it back and forth, does that trigger your brain more? Do you feel more creative in that process?
I definitely feel more creative. I think the ideas are better, but I think the execution's more difficult because I think my skill is in revising, not in writing. And so my final draft is decent, but my rough drafts I feel ashamed of. And so when you're writing with a partner, you're having to let them see your worst writing.
Oh, yeah.
And that's tough.
Right.
My partner's rough drafts are so good. I'm like so jealous of his ability to just like
fuck that guy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I did want to say though, one thing that I feel like especially in Wool, that came out of the way you wrote it is that it's definitely a book with a series of cliffhangers. And I think because you were writing it in chunks, and correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously I wasn't there when you were writing it, but it feels like you were writing up to a cliffhanger, and that was the end of a chunk, and then you would write the next chunk, and you would expand on the previous idea and explain some of the things that happened, but then the idea would include the next, build up to the next cliffhanger. And it kind of feels, and watching the show, I definitely get that, like each episode kind of ending with one of the book cliffhangers, right?
Yeah, it was an advantage of blocking out the season because we had these rough 10 episodes, and like 5 of our endings were pretty easy because we had these 5 books that had very definitive endings.
Yeah.
I try to write even chapters like that. Like I think it's why I hear people like read like really late into the night, or they miss a bus stop or whatever. You want the chapter to end with like almost a snare drum, finale, like you've dropping the mic a little bit or landing a joke. The pace is so that like, oh my God, I have to start the next chapter. I was just going to read to the end of this chapter, then I was going to go to bed. And you get to the end of that chapter and you're like, fuck, I got to see what happens next. And it works well for TV. But I think I growing up on comic books, I think helped with that style of writing because comics, you have to tell like a big story inside of a bunch of smaller stories.
But what made you start thinking about the silos and all of what made you start thinking about this story? It
was the wall screen that really I built the story around more than the silo. The silo was just a container for the wall screen. Mm-hmm. But the idea, I was noticing, I was working at a university bookstore, and so I'd sit behind a desk and kids were just walking past all day. And I noticed how many were just glued to their cell phones, and that even us at work, like we were getting all of our information about the world through our computer screens or 24-hour news. And I was like, wow, like I was just talking about Plato's cave with some philosophy professor. And I was like, well, these screens are like Plato's cave. We don't actually see the world. We see, instead of shadows, we're just seeing pixels, basically. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, what's that doing to our brains? Especially because we're kind of selecting for bad news. Like, they don't just show the world as it is on the screen. They show the worst version of it to keep our attention. I was like, this has got to be damaging to us. And that's kind of how a lot of sci-fi ideas are born. You kind of see something contemporary and you're like, let's exaggerate that and see the effect that it would have. And so I was like, let's just like imagine being trapped. You know, where the only view we have of the world is through this one screen. And that view is abysmal. And does that destroy people's hope? Does it make them? And so I think the biggest conflict I've had in life is like being an optimist. Being an optimist is so difficult. Mm-hmm. It's the one thing that both political spectrums can agree with, is that I'm an idiot for thinking the world's getting better.
Yeah.
And, but I've always thought that. Like, I've read a lot of history, and I'm like, this is entertaining, but I do not want to live here.
Yeah.
Like, you put a history book down, and you're like, thank God I live in the present, right. And can we get to the future quicker? Because, right. Like, shit just keeps getting better and better.
Just to add to your point, I'm reading Team of Rivals right now, the Lincoln book of the Count, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, fucking Lincoln, like, the shit that these people went through, you know, like, everybody's wives is dying of scarlet fever, and their kids are dying, and it's like, God damn.
Yeah, I mean, you had 5 kids so that 3 of them would survive.
So 3 of them would survive, and I'm like, oh fuck, you know, but I am like you. I'm like an incurable optimist. That's just where my mind kind of goes, and I think like the dynamic of this podcast is Ty's is as cynical as you get. So it's like we kind of have like the both
I
sides
prefer
of
to think
thing.
of it as I'm not a cynic, I'm a realist. But the reality is, I mean, this is off topic, but the reality is, he was right.
Do we have a topic? What's our topic?
The topic is just random bullshit. But this is different random bullshit.
Did you say, do we have a topic? What's our topic?
Yeah, the topic is random bullshit. It always is.
You're our topic, Hugh. You're the star of the show, man. We're getting to know you, baby.
Oh, my God.
But to Hugh's point, all of the trends are better. Like, fewer people die of violence now than at any point in history. There's less violent crime than at any point in history. There's fewer wars. And like, obviously, everybody's watching the Russia-Ukraine thing, but there's fewer wars going on than at any point in history. All of those things are true. The difference is that it used to be if some guy in your village got stabbed, like the people in the village knew about that, but that was the extent of it. Now, if some guy in the village gets stabbed, it is 24-hour news, everybody talking about the guy who got stabbed, and it feels then like a lot of people are getting stabbed, even though they're not.
Yeah,
that's the difference. Is we just sensationalize the few things that are happening and blows it all out of proportion.
And you could have, you know, thousands of wars all around the world when they have swords and spears and muskets, but now they have nuclear weapons and there's a threat of a nuclear weapon. The wars count more, so there's more at stake when you think about going to war.
Yeah, so that was the wall screen, and the kind of bad news was the start of it. I honestly, when I was writing the first story, I wasn't sure what kind of ending I was going to put in the story. Like, I would go back and forth about whether or not the view on the screen was how it really was, or if it was better than that.
Really? That's interesting. So you didn't know when you were writing the story what it was really like outside?
Yeah, I had an idea of one ending, but I was in such a foul mood. I lost my dog of 9 years, and I was like as sad as I've ever been. And so I was like, I'm just going to write something dark, you know, just for me, you know, and the story opens with a guy who's like, you know, it says clearly he's walking upstairs to kill himself. I like kind of leaned into the darkness, but I was like fighting it because I'm an optimist. So I was like going back and forth. And when people read that first novelette, I hear all the time, like, I thought I knew how it was going to end and I was wrong. And I think they're picking up on, it's hard to like sell the fake version of an ending when you're writing. Since you know how it's going to end, you kind of unconsciously make it obvious, even if you're trying to deflect. But because I wasn't sure, I think I was giving both versions of the ending equal weight. And it makes the guessing game in that little novelette like kind of addictive, I think, as a reader. And I wasn't trying to write a twist ending. I was just trying to write about a world where nothing could be known for sure. And that's the state of mind that I was definitely in when I was writing it.
And it definitely shows up in the work and the show and in the book. One thing that I, as a writer, that I find interesting is the intended source of tension is not always actually the most effective source of tension. So for me, reading it and then watching the show, I was way less interested in the screen than I was, why do people bother to wipe the camera? Like that was much more of a source of tension for me. Like I needed to understand why people get outside and because if they threw me out, I'd be like, fuck your camera. I'd take a big rock and I'd smash it, right? But nobody does. They go out and they wipe it, and they do it every time. And it's such an open question that people actually like take bets on it. Like, is the person going to wipe the camera? Yeah.
That was a big part of, I'd seen a documentary about the Green Mile, like the place that people on death row are kept, and how long it can take with all the appeals and everything to put someone to the end of that process. What fascinated me about this documentary was that on the day that they were put to death, the prisoners would stand up. They would say, okay, now it's time. They would stand up and walk to the chair.
Right.
And I saw that with a couple of people, and the capital punishment to me, I think, is a crime. Like, we should not be taking the risk. There's so many reasons we shouldn't be doing it. One is that it's more expensive than just keeping people in jail forever. But we know that we've killed innocent people, and all it takes is one of those to not have that as a system. It doesn't deter crime. There's nothing good about it. But that's why it's important to watch documentaries like this. It really cements just what a heinous thing this is. But the thing that fascinated me was putting myself in that position. I thought they would come for me that day, and it would take 5 people to pull me out of that cell. And you never saw that. People just numbly went along, and they talked about how it's kind of like you have tunnel vision. Like, you've been thinking about this day, and you know the date is coming up, and you've been reliving it. It's just torture, really. And so the going along with the cleaning totally came from me watching this documentary and being completely befuddled by the state of mind that people would be in, where they would just go along and do what you were asking as you were doing the worst thing possible to them, taking their life. Right. So it was a huge part of my my own process that I was trying to work through as I was coming up with the cleaning.
Hugh, we promised our producer, Joseph, poor little feller, that we would keep it to an hour because he's got to edit this thing at the end. But I had such a good time hanging out with you and talking with you, and we'd love to have you back on, as, other seasons, other things come out and progress. Also, to talk about something that, what, Joseph? Yeah. Yeah, if you want to, or a book. If you have a favorite book
talk
or favorite
about a movie.
I mean,
obviously he's in the wheelhouse.
Deep dive with Ty and I, and like get in the weeds. I mean, we'll spend, as much time as Joseph will allow us of like just diving into our favorite books, our favorite movies, and certain things like that. And it's always fun, to have certain people on to kind of just talk about things they love.
We should make Hugh read Between Two Fires and then come talk about it with us.
Yeah. Oh, Hugh!
I'm all for it.
Hugh would be a great.
Give me an assignment.
He would be a great guest for Between Two Fires because he would be reading it for the first time, and then also somebody that is a novel writer. Somebody that come in and give that good commentary to it. Do you like horror at all?
Yeah, I love horror.
Okay, this book is punk fucking rock. It's a book that Ty and I love. And I feel like people don't talk about it enough. And
I'm sure you've already done a show on it. I'm sure.
It's not well known.
No,
we haven't.
Not well known. We are going to have the author on at some point, but we're not going to do the deep dive with him. You do the deep dive with people that are fans of the material. But so Between Two Fires. I mean, it is. You know what? I'll just I won't tell you much about it and just let you read it or whatever. Okay. But it's a really interesting book. But
we'll hang out a lot once I move to your hometown.
Yeah, you gotta come. You gotta come.
But the minute you get there, Wes is gonna move.
Thank you guys for hanging out, Hugh. Thank you for hanging out with us. It was a really good time, a lot of fun. Get my email number for Ty. Come hang out with us at any time. And also, we're gonna do either that book or a book that you love or a movie. Whenever you find something you're like, this is the thing I got to do a deep dive on, we're gonna do it. I love you, Ty, my good buddy. Are you about to set sail tomorrow? Or this week?
No, I leave in a couple of days.
Yeah. Okay.
The house sitter is already here. She's already set up shop. She's prepared to hold down the fortress while I'm gone.
All right, so we got some fun stuff in the meantime while Ty's on his journey. We're going to have Boomer guest starring on. We're going to do Dumb and Dumber, Boomer fan favorite. And then I'm going to have a few more surprise guests to kill time until Ty makes it down south to where his buddy is. and we're gonna do our first in person. Oh no, it's not our first. We did the whole season 6 in person. Yeah. We're gonna do a bunch of in person Ties and That guys, and we're gonna do the live Q&A and all that fun stuff. So be looking forward to that and hanging out with you guys. Say goodbye, Ty.
Goodbye, Ty.
Welcome back to Tying That Guy.